My name is Michelle, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Noble TouchStar Optimization Conference Call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. If you should require assistance during this call, please press star and 0, and an operator will come back on the line to assist you. Mr. Busick, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much, Michelle. This is Randy Bassick. I'm a longtime TouchStar employee, currently Noble Systems Senior Solutions Engineer. I want to welcome you all today to the webinar that we're going to be presenting on the TouchStar platform, the optimization. It is fairly similar to the optimization webinars that we've done in the past in the old TouchStar tradition. There's a lot of features that will be repetitive to some of you. I'm looking at the list of people that are attending, and a lot of old friends, a lot of good names that I know, a lot of sites that I've been to, so I want to welcome you all. If you do have any questions, there's two means to submit questions to us. If you look on your screen under the Office Live Meeting, there's a Q&A portion on there. If you want to submit questions during the conference or during the webinar, I will take some of them towards the end. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on question and answers. Or towards the end, we're going to give you an email address that you can email in questions that will be directed to me or whoever they may pertain to. Hopefully, we'll be able to answer all or as many of them as we can during this webinar. Let's move along to today's agenda. I'm going to be going through, like I just did, the introduction, do a little update with the TouchStar product line. For those of you that attended our SNUG conference back in April, we made an announcement of the Noble Express product. We are moving forward on that right now. I don't have a target date for announcement or beta testing or release on that yet, but as we said at the SNUG conference, the TouchStar platform is not going away in any shape or form. It will still stay in place. We're still doing maintenance updates. Our development staff is still engaged in the TouchStar product. There won't be any changes. And for those of you that are not on version 6.0, version 6.0 was released earlier this year through the Noble process, and prior to that we were installing the version 6.0 probably for about 6 or 7 months in beta form prior to that. So the latest version of TouchStar, which will be shown in the optimization webinar today, has been out in the field for well over a year. We have had probably about 160 customers upgrade to version 6.0, so it's a proven product, and we strongly encourage, if you are not on version 6.0, to consider moving up to it. We've recently had some issues where we've been doing some professional services or some upgrades to existing customers where we found that we were running into some problems because they were on an older version, 5.5.5 or 5.6.4. And at some point in time, those versions will be, I can't say eliminated, but there's some fixes or some configurations that have been provided in version 5.7.0 or 6.0 that have been fixed for many years now that are somehow still causing problems out there. So one of the suggestions that our support and our operations team made to me is to encourage everybody out there that if you're not on a later version, 5.7.0 or 6.0 for TouchStar, to consider it and contact either support or your sales account manager to make arrangements to either do a demo of the new version or actually do an upgrade of it. As long as you're current on support, that upgrade comes at no additional charge, and I think you'll see some increased stability and improved performance if you do go up to it. I'm going to give the optimization presentation here shortly. and then once I complete that, we will go through a short, maybe 5-10 minute question and answer period. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. The TouchStar application has been designed in such a way that there are some real-time screens that are provided for you that will give you a up-to-date snapshot of activity that's taking place on your system right now. The number one screen that when I'm doing system optimization or I'm doing some work with customers is the campaign screen in the supervisor application. The campaign screen provides a lot of valuable information. We'll go through some of it. There's some key bits of information that I keep real close track on when I'm working on systems. And you know, typically, if I get called in to help out on a system or provide some optimization assistance, it's usually because there's some factors happening in your call center that are undesirable to you, or you know, the perception is that the system's not running up to advertised productivity, and sometimes that may be the case. You know, there might be some hardware or some software complications that might be occurring that we are able to identify at that time and rectify the problems. But I find 90% of most problems are actually originating in some of the settings or some of the workflow that's being done on the floor, and you know, some of the perception that my system isn't dialing fast enough, or I'm not making enough connects, or I'm not penetrating my list far enough. It's not really a system problem. It's more or less a settings or just a workflow type situation. So some of the things I'm going to point out to you today pertain to those areas. Like I mentioned, this particular screen, the campaign screen, there's about 5 or 6 real important bits of information in here that I pay real close attention to when I first start looking at a screen. Number one, and I've mentioned this many times before, is I start looking at the calls per minute area, which is on the first line, the third one over. Calls per minute basically tell you what the machine is actually, or what the system is actually performing on a calls basis. Calls per minute actually will determine the number of connects that you get, the number of contacts that you get, and if anything, when I come across a system that the customer is saying that it's not dialing fast enough, that's one of the first things that I look at is your calls per minute. And if I'm adding more lines or changing ratios or making some of the alterations to the system, that's the one area that I look at to see if I'm making progress or not. And then once I hit that optimal calls per minute number, that's on an ongoing basis, that's usually the benchmark of what I tell the customer to be aware of or watch to make sure that the system is meeting that performance. So that's, like I said, that's one of the main things I look at. Another one that I look at is the drop calls, drop percentages. That's definitely important in most calling environments, telemarketing especially. The drop calls and drop call percentage is something that you can't really control absolutely, but the system, if you're using predictive dialing, will attempt to adjust pacing, adjust the number of lines that it's dialing on in accordance with the number of agents and the average call times, average wrap times, things of that nature. I know it's a very important feature as far as compliance goes, but most of the adherence to that drop call compliance starts right with the agents. The agents can definitely affect that drop call percentage just by their behavior. Essentially what my suggestion to any call center manager or supervisor when they're trying to talk to agents is to have the agent be consistent. I'm aware that, different call centers have different needs as far as in the wrap-up mode. They may be updating databases. They may be, out emailing. They may be doing whatever wrap-up or finalization needs to be done for that particular call as far as your workflow goes. If that's the case, it's perfectly okay, but make sure that that's consistent. If they're going into wrap-up mode and stepping out and going on a break, that's not acceptable because that will throw the predictive dialing algorithm off, and the predictive dialing algorithm directly affects that dropped call percentage. A couple of the other things to be aware of, especially if you're leaving messages on your calls, answering machine messages. I was recently in a call center where they were leaving a answering machine message. The answering machine message actually was over a minute and a half in duration. And their complaint was that they weren't making enough calls in the day. Well, one of the observations that I made was that they had about 80 lines allocated to the campaign, and at any given time, the number of calls in the IVR were in excess of 50% of those lines. In fact, at one point in time, there were almost, for the 80 lines, we had 70 IVRs running, meaning that there were 70 calls that were giving this IVR message. Well, essentially what that does is that will push your live calling lines available to the point where your ratio is literally down to almost nothing because your system is working so hard to deliver these answering machine messages. So one of the things to be aware of if you're leaving that is watch that in IVR area, because that definitely can affect, and it artificially will make you think that the system's not dialing, because you'll go into the activity screen and you won't see any activity. You'll see your agent sitting in long periods of wait time. The actual problem is not that the system isn't dialing, it's that it's delivering these answering machine messages, which is what you're telling it to do, and it's essentially eating up all your resource. So, it's something to be aware of, and something, as far as a real-time display that it might be overlooked in some areas. I actually never even looked at it myself in the past until I came across this situation when I was trying to analyze why they weren't getting enough calls, and that was definitely the smoking gun. Another one to look at would be the number of calls with an agent. That's a very good thing to do as far as, you can see in one snapshot here exactly how many agents are on a call. It won't tell you on this screen how long they've been on the call for, but when you're trying to balance things out during the course of the day, it's good to know that there are, a certain percentage of your agents that are talking at any given time. Number of the other displays in here have to do with inbound calls or ACD routing. If you're in a very high-level inbound situation, your ACD, your service levels, your ASAs, your maximum queue time, your abandon rates, those are very important to you, and this supervisor campaign screen will give you a lot of that real-time information. Of course, the information is also available to you in a historical reporting context in the TouchStar Reporter. And if you're not on the most current version of Reporter, you may also want to consider that, because we've added a lot of inbound reports that deal specifically with these inbound and ACD type statistics. Next screen that I'm going to go to here is the history screen. The history screen having to do with what's actually happening with your current calls. And if you haven't seen 6.0 yet, you'll notice that if you highlight a call or a campaign within the history screen, a grid or a graph will come up down below that will give you some graphical representation. This is, for the most part, just a system-generated status of what calls have happened. You'll notice there's no call result code type statuses in here. Anything having to do with call result codes would be either the person the no answer, the busy, the answering machines. Those are system-generated call result codes that the agent does not have any input on, but it will give you a mixture of what you've got in real time. I'm going to go on to the next slide here, which has to do with the calls per minute, which I mentioned before, your drops and your drop percentage, your total calls, your contacts, and successes. Total calls, especially if you're running, say, IVR messaging type campaigns. What I do with my IVR messaging, or what I suggest to do, is put a call result code, because in the IVR parameters or the properties, you're able to add a IVR, or I should say a call result code in there. And what I do with those call result codes is I also add them into the administrator, the call result code section, and I put some statuses on it. Some of the statuses being, I've got a contact out of this, or I have a success. And as I'm running through this, I can watch my contacts and my successes, and I can see the progress that's happening. Been recently working with some very large survey companies, and then also some companies that were working for the political elections that took place in early November. And we were able to do a lot of real accurate real-time analysis of what was going on based on the call result codes that we implanted into the IVRs. So, you're able to actually control IVRs and see where there are as far as successes and progresses go if you incorporate CRCs and then create those CRCs as an agent-type CRC, but they can also be associated with an IVR. So there's some advantages of using that as far as being able to control your system. Next screen I'm going to go to is probably the second most screen that I look at when I'm running a system, and that's the active agent screen. Active agent screen will tell you a lot of information about what's happening on the floor, not particularly about the individual agents, other than they're in the different statuses they're in, and that you can color code based on the length of time they've been in any particular status, and it's got multiple layers of color coding. The amount of number of people in a particular status, the number of people in particular campaigns, they can be adjusted or sorted just by clicking on the header row within that particular field. But I also look at this area up on top, which tells me the number of agents that I have logged into a particular campaign, the number of agents in a ready mode, the number of agents that are talking or wrapping or in not ready mode, my average talk time, average wait time, and then the maximum wait time. The maximum wait time is one that I look at very closely. That will tell me what is the maximum wait of the agent that's been waiting the longest for a call, and in a lot of cases that will be a very good indicator telling me that maybe I don't have enough lines allocated, or if I go back to the campaign screen to take a look to see if I'm leaving messages on the IVR, if all the lines have been eaten up by that message, those messages being left. So there's some good indicators on this particular screen to be able to watch this in real time. If you're familiar with the setting to be able to open up multiple versions of the supervisor, you can actually have multiple windows of the same campaigns open where you can watch, your active agents and your campaign screen, or possibly your line screen simultaneously. It's a very easy way to set this up, and it gives you a little bit better viewing, so you're not having to flip from one screen to another to be able to get this. You can watch multiple screens. You can watch as many screens as you want in real time by using that feature. If you're not familiar with how to use it, you can give support a call, and they'll be more than happy to instruct you on how to set that particular parameter up. The next screen that I look at is the system activity log. I wouldn't spend a lot of time looking at the system activity log, other than just seeing from a snapshot point of view what's happening on your system. You know, one of the first indications, if it seems like the system's slowing down, you can come to this screen and you can actually see, as the calls are being statused at the back side, exactly what's happening. And most of the time, I can't say 100% of the time, where the indication is that the system's slowing down isn't really correct. If you come to this screen, you will see a lot of different activity taking place. It might be a lot of answering machines. It might be a lot of no answers. It might be a lot of no CPA or operator intercepts. One of the indications on this screen, if you're getting consistent operator intercepts, is you can go in and look at the particular lines that operator intercept is in association with. And if you get large strings of operator intercepts, identify the lines. It may indicate that you have a T1 trunk that might be down. So you may have 24 lines out there that the system's actually dialing on, that it will never get through because there's a problem at the telco. At that point, what you can do is you can deactivate that trunk or those channels by either using a line blocker or just disabling them from this campaign. And you'll actually get better call throughput. At the same time, I'd also suggest you call your telephone company to have them check that particular line out. But that's an early indicator that you may have a T1 down. Moving over to the administrator portion of this, under the campaign builder, there's a lot of parameters within the campaign builder that will give you the basics or the rules on how you set your campaigns up. That will affect the optimization of your system. You know, selecting the proper campaign type, whether it be predictive, power, preview, selecting inbound, outbound, or blended, connecting to people or people and answering machine. That's one area that's been confusing in some regards to people. The people and answering machine would be the selection that you'd have if you desired to leave a message on the answering machine. So if the system detected an answering machine, it would go to your IVR routine for answering machines, and it would process that answering machine message. I've seen some systems that have that feature where the people and answering machine is checked, where they are not leaving an answering machine message. So essentially what you're doing in that case is you are telling the system that, oh, I want to detect an answering machine, and we're going to sit there and wait for that answering machine message to play in its entirety, and then the system is going to say, and then what you're telling me is at that point in time I'm going to queue up an IVR to play. Well, if you don't have an IVR in here, if you just leave this as none, you have just wasted precious seconds on your system to play that message that isn't there. So one of the ways that you can identify or help speed up your system is make sure that if you're going to play an answering machine message that you've allocated one there. And if your intention is not to play one, make sure that the setting on this screen here, which is your campaign's type screen, is set to people only, and in that case it will filter out answering machines if you have the answering machine detection set. If it detects an answering machine, at that point it will be disconnected, and then it'll just go on to the next call. So, like I said, some of these settings are the rules that you apply to your system. Have a purpose, and you know, we will meet that purpose if they're set up right, but in some cases there's some confusion on exactly what these features do, and if they're set up wrong, they will do exactly what you tell them to do, and if it's wrong, it'll do it absolutely wrong. So heads up on that. As far as your ring count goes, ring count has to do with the number of rings that the system will put out there, attempting to determine if it's a no answer. If this is set out, in this case I have it set at 6 rings, so a 6-ring cadence would actually be about 20 to 25 seconds. If you wanted to speed the system up, one of the suggestions that I put in there is maybe lower your ring counts, 5, possibly 4. that may, even though on individual calls, only speed it up by a matter of seconds, but when you're doing hundreds or thousands of calls over maybe 50 to 100 lines a day, you actually can gain, literally hundreds or maybe even thousands more calls a day based on that one setting alone. The drop call wait time, typically it's set at 2 seconds. You can adjust it whichever way you want. I actually saw a very creative way in a call center, I believe the gentleman's on the call here, where they set their drop call wait time to 1 second. And they actually have some very good success with the drop call being set to 1 second because it doesn't leave a customer on a line for an extended period of time in that, the dead air. And in that case, what they'll do is they'll recycle that call to be called back at a later time. But it was a very, like I said, creative way to use the drop call area. I had never seen it before, but the thought process behind it was very intriguing, and it is something to consider. Moving along, your pacing. Pacing really is something that is kind of a misunderstanding. The pacing bar is not like an accelerator or a decelerator or a brake. It's not really how many calls or how quickly the calls are being made. The pacing has to do with when the call in the wrap-up portion of the agent cycle is made. If you are speeding the pacing up, that means if an agent goes in the wrap-up, and let's say like their average wrap-up is, say, 10 seconds, if you speed pacing up, it's going to start making that call within the first second of that 10-second wrap-up threshold or wrap-up time. If you slow it down, what it's going to do is it's going to make those calls or start making calls later during that wrap-up mode. Where if you move it all the way down to the slowest speed that is out there, that you conceivably are not making a call during wrap-up at all, and you're making a call when the agent goes into the ready mode. So that pacing bar, you may think it's speeding up or slowing down, but it actually has to do when the call is made during wrap-up. If you are using predictive and you don't have this auto-adjust, or a targeted drop rate, this pacing bar doesn't really do anything. Now, if you are in some of the power mode dialing, the non-predictive, and we'll discuss that here shortly, the pacing bar does come into play as far as speeding up the calls. What it does is it either makes a call earlier or later during the call cycle. Another area that will definitely affect your dialing is the record fetching, the time zones, and the sort order. Record fetching has to do with the number of records that are going to be in your buffer. One of the suggestions, or a lot of questions, a lot of people ask me, so what is the correct number to put in here? As far as fetches per minute, there's a very easy formula to use. If you look at your calls per minute that I pointed out on the first page, you always want your fetching to be higher than your calls per minute, because if your fetching is lower than your calls per minute, essentially what's happening is you're calling all of these calls, and then towards the end of that minute, because these fetches will happen once a minute, the fetch cycle has exhausted all of the records in the buffer, so your system essentially will stop for those seconds that there's no records, and then when it fetches again, it will start up and dial again. So one of the easiest rule of thumbs is make sure that your fetchings per minute is higher than your calls per minute. And if you're using parent-child relationships, make sure that your calls per minute for the child campaigns equal more fetches or more records than what the composite for the parent campaign is, and you'll be able to stay ahead of it. As far as what the ratio should be, I suggest usually 1.5, sometimes 2, but for the most part, just make sure that you're above that. Time zones. Remember that if you start dialing early in the morning and you're dialing across the country, not all of your time zones will be active at that time. So if you think you're dialing X number of records, you may want to double check to make sure in the time zone area. In the supervisor, under the dial table selection, if you right-click on that campaign under the dial list section, you will see a breakdown of your records by time zone. So that will give you some indication what's available to be dialed and what's not. Another very important feature is the sort order of the fetch. I still, unfortunately by default, when a system is put in, the system starts out with your sort order being at none. And essentially what happens when you're at none is you may run the risk of dialing the same numbers at the beginning of your list over and over and over again until you meet your maximum number of attempts, and you may never penetrate all the way to the end of that list on a daily basis. I see that as a problem in probably 20 to 30% of most call centers that I go to, not using the sort order correctly. I suggest at minimum that you set your sort order to attempts. Attempts means that it will only pull records with the least number of attempts first. So if your goal is to penetrate your list 100%, you run a better chance of penetrating that by leaving your sort order at attempts and getting all the records with 0 attempts dialed before you start doing recalls or second or third attempts. And I'll show you in a minute an area that you can see what your attempts are in real time. Mentioned before about the algorithms that we use. Under predictive dialing algorithms, we use McMahon A or PsyOps. McMahon A is the suggested one. There are some instances where PsyOps might be to your benefit, but typically a PsyOps predictive dialing algorithm will only be effective on campaigns with more than 50 agents logged into a single campaign. And in that case, some of the averages, there's some smoothing that's involved with it to accommodate, larger pools of agents to be able to pass calls through, and it's typically also involved with larger lists, so that PsyOps isn't really recommended, but it is available to you. As far as the power dialing algorithms, the McMahon B is the recommended one, and if you use McMahon B, that one you can adjust the pacing by using the pacing bar. You can speed it up. It's typically will segment calls out by 15 seconds between calls, and if you increase that, you can actually make calls quicker, or if you slow it down, it'll actually segment those calls or delay those calls out longer than 15 seconds. Greenberg C is similar to the McMahon B, except it actually has a little bit more reaction as far as the pacing bar. And it actually, the Greenberg C reacts a little bit like the predictive dialing algorithm, but it's not a true predictive dialing algorithm, but it is available to you. Traditional power dialing is the maximum speed dialing selection, where whenever there's a call or a line available and an agent in ready mode, it will make a call on every available line. You want to be careful when you use this if you're using ratios of, let's say, 2 to 1, and let's say like you've got 10 agents logged into it, and 9 of those agents are on a call. That 10th agent, when they go in ready mode, essentially the system will make 11 calls for that one agent. So traditional, it's very useful to be able to maximize the number of calls, but be careful how you use it. I do use traditional when I am first setting up a system or doing troubleshooting on a system, because I have complete control of what's happening on the system at that time, and I can see, all the different things that are happening, or all the different parameters and how they may be affecting this. And in some cases, traditional may be advantageous for you, but that's just a brief explanation of what some of these different algorithms can do. The last screen I'm going to bring up is the TouchStar List Manager utility. The List Manager utility is an actual dial list manipulator. You can inactivate records that are loaded into your system based on different parameters. You can delete them from the dialing list, or you can actually merge them into other campaigns using this utility. But one of the things that I really like about the list manager is that it will give you primary fields as far as different campaigns go. And I use it as a real-time display, in this case, for attempts, where I'm dialing this campaign, the dialing to campaign, and I can see, based on my the number of records in here, I can see that I've got 1,190 records that I've never dialed, got 85 that have been dialed once, 25 that have been dialed 2, 8 that have been dialed 3 times, so on and so forth. So this gives me a picture of what exactly is happening in real time on the system as far as the attempts go. And when I'm analyzing or optimizing a system, I'll use this utility quite often. It's almost always an indicator that the wrong sort order is being used. If I come in here and I see, like records that you've got records that have been dialed 10 times, but you've got a very large inventory of records that have never been dialed. Well, the first thing I'll do is I'll go back to that sort order parameter, and I'll see if it's set to attempts, and usually it's set to none, and that's just one of the indicators that I use. But there's a lot of information here that's available to you in real time that's very beneficial for you to be able to utilize on an ongoing basis. That hopefully this 45 minutes that we spent together with each other today will give you some of this information or some indicators on which way to actually help you optimize or control your system instead of it controlling you. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. So I do have a couple questions that have popped up. If you've got any more, go ahead and submit them, but I've got a question in here right now. Let's see. I've got a question is, what is the average or acceptable percentages of answering machines that are connected to a live rep? How can you resolve attempts to start logging failed for agent XXX? Okay, so there's actually two questions there. I'll answer the first one first. As far as the answering machines, the answering machine portion of it, it's controlled. There's a template that is in both the Dialogic and the NMS boards that we use as far as answering machine detection. We're actually looking at two things simultaneously. One of them is called positive voice detect, and then positive answering machine detection. And they're based on cadences that come through the voice inflections of that call. And depending on how an answering machine message is made, or the background noise that was happening when that answering machine was being made, or even if a live person picks up, if there's a lot of background noise, especially if it's on a cell phone, we may detect that as an answering machine, or we may detect it as a person, pass it through to an agent, and the agent then has to disposition it as an answering machine. The question, I believe, is, well, how do I affect that percentage to lower it? There's some settings that can be set, and if you work with our technical support departments, they can advise you as far as different templates or different answering machine detection modes that are in there. We actually have about 6 or 7 different layers that are available to you. So if that's an issue, please do contact the support department. The second portion of that, attempt to start logging failed for agent XXX. What that essentially means is that the recordings, the RC1, is failed. That typically is an internal situation with either the workstation not communicating with the telephony server correctly to initiate that recording. If it's a chronic problem, the support department can also work with you to rectify that. Sometimes it could be an error on the telephony board. Occasionally it will be a problem with the operating system, but if it is a chronic problem, like I said, please do make an effort to bring support in on it. They can run some logs, and they can be able to trace this. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to wrap this up because I'm actually at the end of my time right now. Can agents be in the dialer and receive? Can agents be on the dialer and receive inbound calls? Actually, yes, they can. We have 2 different methods for inbound calls. You can have them logged into an inbound exclusive campaign, and in that case, on an inbound IVR, the calls would be routed to that particular campaign, and the agent that's been waiting the longest would take the next call. Or we can do what's called blended calling. Blended calling allows you to create a campaign that enables you to both inbound and outbound calls on that campaign simultaneously. And the way the system works is that it will treat those inbound calls with priority, meaning that, you know, an inbound call will jump to the front of the queue if there's outbound calls being made. And you can also set the threshold for that inbound queue. You determine, let's say, for example, that you don't want any more than 2 calls to be in that inbound queue at any given time. So if you meet that inbound threshold, which is set by you in the under the campaign type, set that inbound threshold to 2 and your queue reaches 2, the system actually will stop dialing all outbound calls for that campaign and then address or transfer all the inbound calls until it gets below that threshold that you decide. So the blended campaign is actually a highly used campaign to be able to do both inbound and outbound simultaneously, but it also is a controllable method to be able to control the number of calls that are in the queue at any given time, the inbound queue, and make sure that they receive priority. The last question is, how many agents do you consider to be a large group? My interpretation of a large group would be one that I would say over 25 would be considered a large group. I mean, I've seen call centers where they have literally hundreds of agents on the same campaign, same lists and things. But when you go over 25, there's some factors that come into play as far as making sure that your list fetching is up to date or staying up with the pacing of your calls. Making sure that, you know, if you have over 25 agents and your line ratios, let's say like you're at 2 to 1, so you're utilizing 50 lines in there. At any given time, you know, depending on what the mixture of those calls are or what you're doing with them, you may not be getting 100% utilization of all your lines when you're in these large groups. I mean, one of the effective ways to do this is to do parent-child campaigns. Parent-child campaigns, you literally can group your entire call center onto one parent campaign and disperse calls for the child campaigns based on different ratios of your fetching percentages, and, you know, be able to do more calls for particular campaigns than others, but mix them throughout the course of the dialing day. And you wind up doing 2 things here. You maximize the efficiency of your lines. You know, lines are a resource that are a valuable commodity. And then also, you know, as far as achieving all of your goals within a day to penetrate your list exclusively or 100%, or you know, maximize your number of successes. You know, your goals. You may have a goal to hit, you know, 100 sales or 100 completes in a day. You know, being able to utilize the system in multiple fashion through the parent-child arrangements is definitely a big advantage, and you know, it takes a little bit of talent to be able to control it correctly. But you know, if you keep in mind those particular parameters that I spoke about earlier in the webinar today, large groups are very manageable. You know, it's just it's on a little bit larger scale. But for the most part, you know, it doesn't matter if you've got 2 or 4 agents on a campaign or 200 agents on a campaign. Your goal for that day is to meet what your management puts in front of you as far as, you know, sales or collections or, you know, successes. of that nature. And the more that you apply as far as rules or indicators to the particular campaigns, the easier it is to control it or be able to view it and adjust it accordingly throughout the day. So we provide a number of those tools that are available to you in both the supervisor and the administrator applications in the TouchStar platform to be able to provide that. A couple of things that I want to wrap up with. As far as version upgrades, I mentioned it earlier. If you're not on version 5.7 or above, in the future, if you make a call into your sales rep or support, please identify to us what version that you are on, because it will help speed up, in some cases, the resolution of that. And then also, if you're considering an upgrade, it'll give us an indicator that, you know, maybe we need to pay a little bit more attention to your particular situation if you're having repetitive support calls for instances that were fixed in subsequent releases. Hardware upgrades. For those of you that are not aware of this, the TouchStar platform for the past 2 years, any new install, we've been using what we call NMS boards. NMS is a division of Dialogic. They're actually a higher level of technology, offer native SIP or native VoIP connections for agents. So if you're considering going into that environment, you know, talk to your sales rep, or you can talk to me. I'm the product specialist or the solutions engineer for the TouchStar product line about your availability to go to that environment. We have been doing some installs recently where we are using the old 4U PCI servers and installing the NMS boards on them, essentially replacing the Dialogic boards. And there's some advantages to doing that, like I mentioned, is that now you can use native SIP for your agent connections. It also facilitates remote agents and floating agent stations. So that's something that you may want to consider. As always, we do offer consulting services. I've been on this year about 6 or 7 on-site consulting visits where you know, you can contract with us. We'll come on-site, evaluate your system, you know, if you've got specific needs or if you're contemplating some moves in the future. We can help you not only in site planning, architecture, capacity planning, disaster recovery, system optimization. There's a number of different fields that we are specialized in to be able to help you in a consulting form. So that service is available to you, and if you are interested, just contact your account manager, and they'll be more than happy to explain it to you or make arrangements for that to happen. And last but not least, for those of you that attended the Noble SNUG, which is the Select Noble User Group, back in April, the upcoming one is scheduled for May 17th through May 19th in Atlanta. The last one was very successful, and I know a number of you have attended in the past the TouchStar user groups. What we do at the Noble user group is very similar, except it's on a little bit larger scale. More people to interact with. It's a great way to you know, get in tune to the latest and greatest announcements on the Noble and the TouchStar platform, and then also to look at the other product offerings. You know, we announced the workforce management application and the speech analytics application at the last SNUG user conference, and this one coming up in May. We'll definitely have all sorts of new and informative type sessions for you to attend and grow. The announcement for that will be coming up shortly, but if you want to put it on your calendar now, if you're interested, it's May 17th through the 19th. So with that, I know there's been a number of other questions that have come in. We'll try to answer them. If you have any additional questions, you can direct them to this info@noblesys.com. The info at NobleSys will get routed to the appropriate person. In most cases, if it's pertaining to this webinar today, it will get routed to me. And if you want to make any comments or any suggestions, we are considering doing either bi-monthly or monthly webinars for the TouchStar product line. I do have on my plate 2 requests, one for our IVR maker and one for our TouchStar reporter. So keep an eye on your email, and we will be making announcements in the future as they come up. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully this was informative for you. If you do have any other questions, please do a follow-up on it. We will follow up on the questions that weren't answered. And with that, thank you all for your continued support and business, and looking forward to working with you in the future. And have a good day.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.